Hello, quilting friends. Happy Feature Friday, everybody. Thank you for joining me this week in my sewing studio. We are picking up where we left off with our quilt, and we had just finished our first row of stitching, so we are going to work on our nesting next. Let me turn you around so you can see the quilt. So if you guys remember, last week we did our circle pattern and finished out our first row. So it is time to nest and get our second row going. So I've got my pattern from my first row up here. We ended at our little tiny square right there at the bottom corner of our pattern, and it is time to nest our design. Now we're still in our home screen, as you can see highlighted here, and our nesting feature is down here at the right. It looks like 2 rows of hearts. One row is filled in and the other is not. I'm going to go ahead and touch on my nesting feature right now. And you saw we got a few things that popped up here, and it's to select and mark your nesting point across the bottom. So I like to hover kind of in the middle of my quilt top. So I'm going to come about here. That's kind of halfway through my quilt top. And I'm just going to drop my needle down in my fabric on one of my stitch lines. I like to be at a low point of my design, but you can kind of choose wherever you like. I like to mark my nesting point with my needle. If you're uncomfortable with that, I always say you can use any kind of marking pencil, marking pen, marking chalk that you're comfortable with it. Just make sure it comes off of your fabric. Do a test run first. You don't want to leave a mark right there in the middle of your quilt. So now that I have selected and marked my nesting point, I can hit the green check mark over here. My instructions now say roll the quilt. So I can come over here and release my roller bars and slowly roll my quilt with the needle being in my fabric. I'm always super careful with how quickly I roll my quilt. I don't want to put any stress on that point where the needle's in my fabric. I want to be nice and easy with this. And I think that is far enough. So I'm going to lock back into place and get that there. All right, and now that that is roll the quilt, I can hit my check mark here. Now it says move the machine to your nesting point. Now remember, I am in my nesting point because my needle's down in my fabric, but if you used a marking tool, you'll want to move your machine into place to hover over that point. I can hit my green check mark because I'm in my nesting point. And now I've got my rows available, and because we set all of this up in our quilt layout and we didn't put any row spacing in there, this is perfectly nested the way I want. If we needed to change our row spacing, we could do that over here with either our cross arrows or this button with the hearts here, where we'd be able to use a keypad to put in our spacing. But I don't need to move any of my nesting, so I don't need to do any of that. I can hit my check mark here. And now it says nesting complete, and here is my new row. So I am nested and ready to go. So normally we can just start up and go, but I need to answer a question that one of my quilting friends has. She asked, when do I stitch down the sides of my quilt to get them down in place? That would be here before you start your stitch out. So you don't do it in the nesting process. You actually do it at this point before you do the stitch out. So you completely nest first, then you can do your sides. So I'm going to go ahead and just put you guys up on my tripod so that I can stitch down my sides. Let's see if I can get you over here on the side. Now I always have to kind of smooth things out a little bit once I've rolled my quilt. And I know I'm walking in front of the camera. Make sure that I don't have any lumps in my batting, because I do float everything. So I want to make sure everything is nice and smooth underneath here. And then I like to use my channel locks. So I will line up with the side of my quilt on my edge And then I will, ooh, I'm attached from where I put my needle in my fabric. I will line up with my last stitching that I had before, drop my needle into my fabric to pull up my bobbin thread. That's gonna be nice and long because I was stuck on the center point, so I'm gonna actually trim those. Now that I've got my bobbin and my top thread, I'll line back up with my edge, drop my needle down, and then I'll use my channel locks to stitch my side down. So because I want to do a vertical line, I'm going to use my horizontal channel lock and get that going and just stitch down the side of my quilt. And I like to go kind of as far as I can before my foot is kind of out of view from my roller bar. And then I'll bring my needle up and down, move out of the way, bring my bobbin thread to the surface, clip my threads, turn my channel locks off, and then I will go down to the other side of my quilt and do the same thing. Oops, sorry guys, I didn't mean to push you so hard. So I'm gonna come on over here. I'm gonna line back up with my row of stitching that I did the last time I did this. Bring my bobbin thread up to the surface. Line my needle back up and drop it in. I'll turn my channel locks on. Again, I'm putting my horizontal lock on because I want to do a vertical line. Turn my stitching on. And get my line to stitch the side of my quilt down. And I'll bring my bobbin thread back up to the surface. So I've got both sides of my quilt stitched down at this point. Now that that's done, I'm ready to go ahead and stitch out my design. So from here, I've got my channel locks off. I don't need them anymore. I'm still in my home screen. My needle's engaged for stitching. I'll hit my green button to start. Double check that my needle's up, that I didn't end with it in my fabric at all when I was doing any of my pull-ups. I'll hit my green check mark. It's going to go to the start of my pattern, and it's going to go through its normal series of bringing my single stitch, bring my bobbin thread up. So I have both of those in my hand now. It's going to recenter in place. I can cycle my needle to lock my stitches and hit my green check mark. And I'll turn my stitching on and hit the check mark on my display. And now I'm stitching my next nested row. So that's kind of the series that we run in. So you do your whole nesting routine step by step, then you stitch your sides down, then you stitch out your nested row. That way you can get your sides stitched down. All right, everybody, here we are. Our nested row is stitched out, and I don't know if you caught my little surprise, but if you look, this row is stitched out in a lovely little minty green to match this fabric, but my first row was stitched out in a little paley pink to match the fabric that's at the bottom of the quilt. So I am switching my colors on my rows as I stitch them out. I thought that might be a fun little surprise, and I haven't done that yet. So after the other week when I was switching my threads out on the quilt that I did with my channel locks, and I was switching them out constantly, I thought, that might be a little bit fun if I switch my thread out on every row. So I figured I'd give it a try on this quilt. So happy surprise, everybody. We'll see how this one goes. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope everybody learned a little something, and I hope I answered my quilting friend's question on when to stitch your sides down when you are doing your nesting. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye.